Hello and welcome to the Energy Industry Scorecard. This is a great tool that HData has unveiled, and we're wanting to give that to you. Hopefully, the value here that you'll be able to find, and we'll walk through a little bit of what you're looking at in the next few minutes, is that you're able to extract meaningful comparisons across the energy and the electric utility industry. I'm Drew Franklin. I lead our marketing efforts here at HData, and I have with me Luke Ashton, who is our regulatory economist here at HData. And we're going to be answering three key areas, and those areas are going to be what kind of data are we looking at, and why is this important to the electric utility industry as far as measuring and being able to have access to that data. And I'm going to get Luke to give us a little bit of insight on how we can find more custom or more tailored data analysis for your particular company. Now, I just want to reintroduce Luke Ashton, and he's going to run through a little bit of why we're looking at the energy scorecard and where is this data coming from. So, Luke, why don't you come on up and share a little bit for us?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Drew. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about what we've been able to create here at HData. And given that we're going to be talking about energy industry scorecards, and what exactly does that mean? I want to be able to dive into that a little bit as well. Scorecarding essentially is analyzing a set like company, or I used to work in the political kind of arena as a data analyst, so I'd create a lot of scorecards on like how states are doing relative to other states. So that's kind of what we're doing here is comparing how companies are doing relative to other companies within, say, a set peer group. So, for example, when we're talking about what actually goes into scorecard data, it can be a lot of different things. It really depends on what exactly you're trying to dive into to answer a specific problem or question that you have. So we have a wide variety of different metrics that we're looking at. And say, for example, I'm looking at A&G per dollar revenue. Well, what does that mean? A&G is administrative and general costs. So if a electric company, in this case, we're looking at electric, if they're filing data with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, there's a line item called A&G, and that usually covers a lot of costs related to salaries, benefits, say the expenses for outfitting the offices, like the desks and the chairs, or even the birthday cake in the office lounge, that all goes into A&G. We can kind of normalize that data by looking at A&G per dollar revenue, because if you're just looking at raw data comparing, say, Alabama Power, which is a massive utility in the state of Alabama, versus, say, Yankee Atomic, Yankee Atomic is a much, much smaller company. So you want to be able to standardize these metrics by looking at it on a per something basis, per dollar revenue, per customer, per megawatt hour generated or megawatt hours sold, other ways to be able to slice and dice this information. And we actually do provide some of that. So looking, hey, here's the regular A&G expense line item, net income, and then we can also look at non-fuel O&M per dollar revenue. Non-fuel O&M, so O&M is operation and maintenance costs. So that is how much are we spending as a company in order to maintain the power plants that we manage, the transmission lines, the distribution lines, the nuclear plants, the hydro plants, really whatever goes into that would go into O&M, and it's non-fuel. The reason we have it as non-fuel is because, hey, you live in, when we're recording this, it's 2022. You've probably noticed that gas prices have been going up and down wildly for the past, few months to year. That's the reason why we actually subtract out fuel costs from O&M, because if you see a spike in that O&M cost, well, is it actually because of an O&M line item increasing, or is it because fuel is just being wonky this year? We want to be able to know that it's an actual O&M line item, an actual thing that we're maintaining rather than just the fuel cost throwing it off. So that's why we actually look at non-fuel O&M. And then we have the raw line item on O&M expenses here. So you can actually look at all the information that we have, all the data, all the companies within our data set here. It's every federal utility that is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So we get a quick look at the scorecard here. We can also dive into the actual visualization of that information. So not just the raw information, but how do we actually visualize that information based on a certain peer group? So for example, I'm looking at ALET here, and we're looking at rate base. So rate base is a very important metric for a lot of electric companies. It ultimately determines how much you and I end up paying on our electric bill. So definitely feel free to check out our website. I actually wrote a whole blog post about what rate base is and how you can understand it from the FERC data. But we're looking at rate base and comparing against a peer group of the entire industry. So say, for example, we're looking at ALET. You can see how rate base is growing as people and companies build out more assets. They're building new transmission lines, distribution lines, power plants that all feeds into rate base. But then you can understand that on a median or average basis. So you can actually see, hey, ALET is slightly below the industry average, but that's okay. They may have a smaller service area than, say, a bigger company like Pacific Gas and Electric, which serves almost of California at this point. So they're a much, much larger company. So it makes sense that their rate base would be a lot larger. So you can really understand how this gets into all of the nitty-gritty line items. What's great about this is you can actually flip any of these cards around and actually see the raw data feeding into it. And when I talk about the nitty-gritty, this is what I mean. Any of these numbers for ALET you can click on and then dive into the actual FERC form itself, the live filing that was filed with the FERC within this new XBRL mandate. You can quickly understand where all those individual line items are coming from. So if we continue down here, we can even understand transmission metrics. Transmission is a huge focus area, especially in 2022 and beyond, as we talk about how do electric companies accommodate distributed energy resources. So DERs, if you've seen the solar panels on people's houses as you've been driving around your neighborhood, that's a DER, that's a distributed energy resource, where if you put a solar panel on your house, and then you generate your own power, and then you sell electricity back to the grid, you need better distribution infrastructure and transmission infrastructure in order to accommodate that. So a lot of people are interested in transmission expenses and cost, and we've been able to provide a lot of that information from the FERC Form 1. So if we want to look at transmission plant, the actual value of the transmission lines that are owned by a particular company, and then we can also look at the transmission expenses. So how much are they actually spending on maintaining those transmission lines? And then I always like to show, say if I want to go ahead and scroll down here, I want to go ahead and show Pacific Gas and Electric. And I want to highlight that because this really shows how important looking at this information is. So you notice a huge spike in PG&E relative to the entire group. For one, PG&E is a massive company. It's absolutely massive, especially compared against other electric utilities. But you also notice you're seeing a lot of spikes, especially in like 2019, 2020, 2021. A lot of that is because of wildfires that were happening with PG&E in those years. So if they have a bunch of wildfires that they're having to manage and put out, it actually damaged a lot of PG&E's transmission infrastructure. So of course, PG&E has to go in and replace it, and then also upgrade their transmission lines to be more resistant to wildfires. So that's why a lot of the spike in transmission expenses is happening with PG&E. But being able to understand, okay, what are PG&E's expenses relative to their transmission plant costs? So you see spikes in the expenses, but the actual investment in the transmission lines is steadily increasing. So it's on a pretty linear upward trend of consistent investment in maintaining of transmission lines. So being able to dive into these various line items is very, very important. All right, so if we're looking at transmission metrics, I've kind of dived into the first two questions that you brought up a little bit earlier, Drew. So what data are we looking at and why is it important? I like to think of those questions as hand in hand of like, what data are we looking at and then why is it important? We always want to be looking at data with a research question in mind. We're not looking at data just to look at data and kind of say like, oh, that's interesting. Like that's still necessary to just be able to explore data, but you really need to approach a lot of these data points with a question in mind of I have this specific problem I want to investigate, and then I want the data to be able to show me evidence supporting and contracting kind of my research question. So that's why we've included stuff like transmission items here, and then going back up, we're looking at rate metrics as well as the raw line items I was kind of talking about a little bit earlier with this table here. Just being able to quickly understand where we might see discrepancies in the data. That's super important, especially if you're a utility and you're working with a regulator, it's really important to understand where you might see discrepancies in data that you might have to explain. Or if you have a peer group of, hey, we're performing above or below average of the peer group, that's going to be something that a regulator is going to be very, very interested in understanding. So being able to investigate that and kind of investigate and ask those questions of yourself before you actually work with the regulator is immensely important, can save you time in the long run. So going to your third question, Drew, of like, how can we get access to this data? This is all here and ready to go for you. So if you're really interested in diving into a specific set of data points, we have the entire FERC Form 1 at your disposal. We were looking at O&M items. That's a very general number. Do you want to look at transmission O&M expenses or distribution, or do you want to look at nuclear power O&M expenses? Those are the individual line items that are available within the FERC Form 1. We can cater what we have shown you here to your specific situation. So I would love to be able to have the opportunity to chat with you, to discuss that. I love getting nerdy with folks. I'm an economist. Like I get nerdy all the time. I've got a whole bunch of like energy economics journals and sitting in my bookshelf here. Like I love to get nerdy with this data. I love to talk with people to understand how they want to use this data. So definitely go ahead, reach out to us. You can go ahead and get started here. And I'd love to be able to have the opportunity to chat with you if you would allow us.
No, that's great. Thank you, Luke. And one of those items that Luke mentioned was just being able to have that demo interaction, or really being able to, one offering we have with this energy scorecard is having a 15-minute session with Luke and being able to talk through the data and what does that mean and how can we make sense of it all. And so feel free to hit that get started button, and we'll hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.